At Southern Company, we know the right solutions start with the right questions. How do we deliver reliable energy and overcome unpredictable challenges? How do we get to net zero carbon emissions and ensure communities thrive? How do we deliver affordable energy today and tomorrow? Southern Company, building the future of energy.
11 o'clock Friday morning. Welcome into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs on your Football Friday, Black Friday edition. Hopefully everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving. The week feels bizarre having a day off in the middle of the week, then coming back in here. But excited for all the football coming up this weekend. Football coming up today. We got wall-to-wall football starting in right at an hour. Watch some Iowa and Nebraska, a little 3-2 game. Final score, hopefully. Send the Big Ten West out with a bang. Got Oregon State coming up tonight. Texas Tech. A lot of good football coming up this weekend.
Shout out to all the people out there shopping. Hopefully y'all are listening to us.
So that was my question in the last hour. I know years ago, Black Friday was always okay, you got to get up at 4 a.m. to be at the mall or Target by Best Buy. 6 when they open or whatever to get all the deals. But nowadays, I see commercials before Halloween hey, Black Friday starts this weekend online. If you're doing it online, it's not really Black Friday. It's just a sale, right? Black Friday is a day to go and do stuff.
Keep pushing it back.
Yeah, it's just getting farther.
It's going to be in January.
Exactly.
You got Cyber Monday, too, but
it's all
just tied together.
Yeah,
now.
It's at that point, you're just having extended sales.
Which
it's
is
not
fine. But it's pretty good sales for the most part.
Have y'all ever done Black Friday, gotten up and done the shopping thing? That doesn't appeal
Probably
to me.
way back in the I don't shop anyway.
Yeah,
I just go online and click. So
my mom used to do it. Shout out to my mom, listen, in Anderson.
My mom's probably shopping today.
Big Black Friday person, so she would go. I mean, she had stories, all the other moms
fighting people for microwaves.
Sounds miserable.
I need that microwave to
get $10 off as the normal.
But there used to be some good deal, but it was all, if I remember correctly, it'd be hey, this TV is 50% off, and then they'd be we got 2 of them in stock.
Oh yeah. It's literally the first 2 people in the door.
Remember
getting
Jingle All the Way, that movie that Arnold Schwarzenegger was in?
I love that movie.
I was going to say it's not bad, though. It's a guilty pleasure. He's fighting people for the Turbo Man doll.
Yeah.
All right, so on from Black Friday.
Yes.
Will Clemson have a Black Monday?
Ooh. Good transition.
What will we be talking about on Monday? It's either going to be a lot of fun for Gamecock fans or not.
Yeah, pretty much. I think regardless, this is a 4-quarter game. I mean, yes, Clemson is probably the second best defense that South Carolina's faced this entire year. I do think the home atmosphere is going to help out a little bit for South Carolina tomorrow, but I don't see either team blowing the other one out in this one. I think it's a 4-quarter game all the way.
Yeah, I don't see South Carolina blowing out Clemson. I think if it were to get out of hand, sorry guys, but if it were to get out of hand, it would probably be in Clemson's favor, truly, I think, because I just look at their front 7. And, Beamer was asked, who does it maybe remind him most of that South Carolina's played? And he was asked, off the top of his head, but he came up with Texas A&M. And, South Carolina actually did a relatively decent job, all things considered, of controlling that A&M front. But, you look at Clemson, you look at what they have up front, you look at what they have at linebacker, Jeremiah Trotter, and, this is a defensive line and just front 6 these days that can they really can take control of a game. And so, I think when you look at South Carolina's struggles up front this year, you look at how they've gotten so one-dimensional in some games, even some games they've won lately during this last stretch. It's hard, we talk about game flow a lot. It's hard to see South Carolina just scoring a bunch of points in this game, at least offensively. You can always have that game where the point total kind of gets out of hand, and you look back and it's well, hey, there was a pick 6 here, there was a fumble in the red zone, and it inflates the score. I'm talking about truly just offense versus defense, who can go up and down the field on the other. So to me, now, last week, I thought from a game flow standpoint, it might be a little more high scoring than traditional South Carolina Kentucky game has been recently. That was clearly not the case. It was a defensive battle. I think if you're South Carolina, the onus this week is once again on your defense. You've got to keep this thing tight enough to where your offense can kind of grind out, 28 points and have a shot to win it. Like, I don't think you can necessarily count, if you're a Carolina fan, count on this offense against that front just going up and down the field.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to, thinking about South Carolina's run game. I think we were talking about last time we were on Wednesday. The run game last season on the road, you got about, 55 total yards. You need a little more than that, I think, this time. But you don't need 150. And I don't think anybody expects. South Carolina is an offensive staff when they're meeting. Probably isn't like, guys, we got to go in there and rack up 200 yards. They don't feel good about that. You wouldn't feel good. They've had a big sample size, and I think Dowell Loggins has done a good job of, recognizing that you're going to have to make attempts to run the football. And you're going to have to try to get creative, but that's not this team's bread and butter. Like Wes said, that has caused them to get one-dimensional at times. You're going to have to try to run the football some. You're probably not going to be hard-headed about it, but you need to get something from it. And the biggest thing for me is just avoiding negative plays, and whether you think about that in the run game, taking sacks, throwing perimeter balls and taking a 4-yard loss because you miss a block there. Those are the things that you really have to try to avoid, more so than, hey, let's get some chunk runs, right? You got to be in more manageable downs and distances. And Clemson, this is a team that ranks in the top 10 nationally. I think they're tied for 7th in tackles for loss. And a lot of that is because they're able to wreak some havoc in the run game. They're able to rush the passer. And that's been a little bit of South Carolina's kryptonite at times. Even last week against Kentucky, South Carolina's 2 best players had some big negative plays. Xavier Legette had a 17-yard loss on a run. Spencer Rattler took an 18-yard sack that knocked them out of field goal range, right? Now, they were able to do what we've seen them do a lot of the year, create explosive plays where they were able to, put a couple key drives together. But that's what they're going to have to do, just avoid those negative plays.
Speaking of the run game, and I know this week's been kind of weird, we did still hear from the coordinators on Wednesday. Let's hear what Dowell Loggins had to say about getting that running game going against a team like Clemson.
Front's really good. This defense is really well coached, and the most impressive thing about them is they play as hard as anyone we're going to play this year. I mean, these guys play hard. And it's something like we've struggled with the run game. Let's just say what it is that we have. And when that happens, everything falls back onto 7 in the passing game, and that's in 17. But it's something you have to kind of stick with, and sometimes you mix them in as breather plays. Obviously, this year we've mixed in catch and carry plays and screens and those perimeter plays, and we use a quick game. We use those as runs as well because you do what you do well. And you can sit there and say, hey, we want to be a run-first team, and the tape says we aren't, and you are what your tape says you are. And so we are a pass-first team, but you can't just sit back there and say, hey, 7's got to win the game every play. He's got to make every decision. He needs breather plays. We need to run the ball more consistently than we have this year. And, so for us, it's another shot at it this week of trying to be more consistent with it.
And again, going back to what Chris said a moment ago, you don't want to be completely one-dimensional. You're going to have some kind of presence of a run, but as we've seen over these past couple games, you're going to have to get very creative with it. Use guys like Xavier Legette out of the backfield, hopefully not for 17-yard losses, and, use some of those, passes behind the line of scrimmage, screens, stuff like that to supplement some of the runs like we saw them doing earlier on in the season. And this is a Clemson team that has given up a fair amount of yards on the ground in certain games. Like they gave up over 200 yards on the ground last week in North Carolina. Now, I would say that North Carolina definitely has a better running back room than South Carolina does, especially from a health standpoint. But it's not impossible to run on this defense, but it's definitely not going to be easy by any means.
When I look at the matchup, I don't feel like South Carolina ran the football incredibly effectively the last 3 weeks, even though it was at home and even though it was against a couple of defenses, maybe not Kentucky, but Jacksonville State, Vandy, you kind of felt like on paper you should have been able to get a little bit at least, or kind of create a little bit of a consistency in the running game. It was once again, we've seen talk about explosive plays in the passing game. Even the running game has kind of been a little bit all or nothing for South Carolina. And so, Chris, still in my thunder here a little bit. I had the tackles for loss stat already queued up. 83 tackles for loss for Clemson's defense this season. That rounds up to 8 per game. So, for 295 yards. Now they don't get as many sacks as they get just tackles for loss, but they do get pressure on opponents' quarterbacks. So, I think the entire key of the running game isn't even to me necessarily that it's some particular number. I think it's just more about, can you do just enough to slow down that rush to make them hesitant to just pin their ears back. When we've seen South Carolina get just completely bogged down on offense and not able to get anything going, I'm thinking along the lines of Tennessee, especially in the second half, Georgia in the second half, Missouri for large portions of that game. It's been more about just kind of that quick pressure, and not the pressure where, hey, you drop back, you kind of survey the field, you're starting to get to your second or third read, and then somebody breaks through, and if you're Rattler, you can then at that point decide what you're going to do. It's been more just kind of that you have no shot type pressure. So I think one thing that stood out to me this year is that not all pressure is created equal. And so can you just slow Clemson down enough? Staring at this top 10 here for tackles for loss, I see Tennessee staring right at me just above Clemson. So, I think you got to avoid this being a game that resembles that one in any way, because we've seen some defensive fronts at times just overwhelm South Carolina.
So this isn't as much of the run game, but it does speak to the quarterback situation and pressures, right? So when Spencer Rattler has time, he's been really good. A lot of times when he has not had time, he's been really good. We've gone over it many times this season, his performance, how good it's been, especially given the circumstances. But doesn't it count for something that you look at this game and South Carolina's playing at home, and the perception, which I think is also the reality, is that they have the best quarterback? Doesn't that count for something?
It does. And again, Rattler's played exceptionally at home this year.
Cade Klubnik has not seen this type of environment. There'll be a lot of Clemson fans in Williams-Brice. We're in Columbia. There's a lot of Clemson fans here. There'll be a lot of Clemson fans in the stands. This is going to be a very pro-South Carolina crowd. He hasn't seen it. This is not Miami. NC State had a pretty good crowd, but this is a hostile environment. He's alternated between, man, that was an impressive play by Cade Klubnik because he is a true dual-threat guy, and what in the world was that? So how many of those latter type of plays that you can create, whether it's the crowd noise, whether it's the defense, whether it's the pressure getting to him, whatever it is, that's going to be a key to this game.
Absolutely. We'll hear what Clayton White had to say about Cade Klubnik, and I'll readdress some of the things that your guy Larry Williams told me about when I talked to him the other day from Tiger Illustrated about Klubnik and his performance this season. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on a Football Friday, getting you set for South Carolina and Clemson here on the game.
I think I've said this before. Anytime I see a player, opponent that we about to play, and I watch them improve over the season, that gives you more respect for that guy as a player. And so, like, to me, I have seen him he's gotten better over the past couple of weeks, the past month or so. Definitely, he's a good quarterback. He can beat you with his feet. He can definitely throw the ball very well, and he's gotten a lot of experience. So his experience now, he's on game. This will probably be game 12 or 13 for him. I think he played a couple games last year at the end of the season, so he's definitely not young anymore.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, West, and Chris along with you. We'll get to buy or sell coming up at the 11:30 segment, so shuffling things around just a bit. That, of course, was the voice of Clayton White, Gamecocks defensive coordinator, talking about Cade Klubnik ahead of Saturday's matchup. And Chris, I brought this point up to your guy Larry Williams from Tiger Illustrated the other day when I talked to him. Go back a full calendar year. Leading into this game, there was so much conversation of you need to bench DJU, you need to put in Cade Klubnik because DJU was turning in the wrong direction. He obviously ended up having a terrible game against South Carolina that led to him getting benched for the ACC Championship game, which Cade Klubnik came in, played well. They blew out North Carolina. He gets to start in the Orange Bowl, and they lose pretty handily to Tennessee. And that kind of describes what the season's been like for him. Very up and down, had some good games, had some bad games. Mentioned that going into business for himself. There was the infamous play against Miami where he runs out of bounds on the 4th down and ends the game. Last week, right before halftime, they had a play where he's lucky they called it a touchdown on the field at first, because it was one of those, what was going to be on the field was going to stand, and he very well could have ran out the clock to end the half without getting any points at all. So he has those moments. This still shows he's coming along as a starter. So, there's a blueprint here for South Carolina to be able to take advantage of his inadequacies to win on Saturday. It's just doing that is going to be the issue.
That's right. And I think we've said this before, but to reiterate, we can officially put to bed the idea that had he started against South Carolina last year in Death Valley, that Clemson would have won by 80 points. You know, I mean, that was never true. And I think we saw enough, even like Tennessee Bowl game this year. We've seen enough to where, I mean, maybe he would have played better than DJ, but that doesn't mean
he wasn't going to throw for 500 yards.
He wasn't going to throw 500 yards. And that has been, again, alternating between very impressive plays and kind of some confounding plays where you're like, what is going on here? There have been issues seems like there's been multiple issues at the end of the half when Clemson's had the ball. There was one in the Miami game where kind of what are you doing? And then some decisions going into business for yourself. I love that one. Fumbles, right? Clemson has to lead the country in red zone fumbles.
The country's in fumbles lost overall.
So yeah.
And a lot of them have come in the red zone.
A lot of them have inexplicably come in the red zone. Now, while I disagree with Dabo Swinney's assertion that they're a few plays away or just fumbles away from being undefeated,
best 7-4 team in the country,
maybe. I disagree with that assertion, but it has played a big role. And so then you go to, okay, the quarterback position. Only guy besides the center, only skill player who touches the ball every single time. And again, this is going to be the most hostile environment he's seen. It's going to be it's pressure-packed game. His first start against his rival. Your receiving core is very banged up. Multiple guys that will either be playing hurt or not playing at all. There's some pressure here in this one. And so what version do we get? We might even see the two versions in the same game at times, I would think.
I think we see that a lot with him, honestly. We see some – I mean, we can talk about the negative, but he is a talented dude. Like he can make some big boy plays. And so, I don't want to sit here and just say, he stinks. He can make some plays for you. I think it was interesting. I was rewatching this Clemson North Carolina game, and they were talking about, he didn't have close games in high school at all. And so the physical ability is certainly there, but I do think some of that stuff Chris is talking about, end of half, end of game, tight game, just situational football where it goes above and beyond kind of the make your read, throw the football. What is the situation what is the context of a play? I think some of that has been lost on him a little bit this year. My issue in trying to kind of predict how this game is going to play out is that turnovers certainly have a ton of randomness to them. Now, coaches will tell you, hey, man, we can teach it. And that's true. You have to take advantage of the opportunities. If you're a defender and you knock the ball out, you have to be cognizant of, hey, this runner with the football is being loose with the ball. So if he's being loose and you're not paying attention and you don't knock it out, then, yeah, you miss an opportunity. Now, if the runner is covering up the football the way he is supposed to, it's going to take an elite play or it's going to be near impossible to get the ball out. So some picks, fumbles, some of it is random, I think. So, it's hard if you're South Carolina to say you got to win this game by counting on Clemson to keep fumbling the football. But at some point, also, the other side of that conversation is at what point is it that's who you are as Clemson. We saw South Carolina all year long last year just have a knack for turning the football over. Even the Clemson game last year that Carolina won, they were turning the football over. So at what point are you a turnover-prone team?
Well, and you guys, we've talked about this so much this season, especially when South Carolina was in the midst of the month of October without generating any takeaways at all. They do indeed come in bunches, and it's so interesting to look at both these teams over the course of this month, both on 3-game winning streaks. Both have generated 9 takeaways over the course of those 3 games, so both come in with a lot of momentum and confidence from a takeaway standpoint. And truly, who wins the turnover battle in this game on Saturday, I think ultimately decides the winner. South Carolina is 0-4 when losing the turnover battle this season. Clemson's not much better at 1-4, so that truly is going to be one of the X factors tomorrow night.
Well, the scary thing for South Carolina is, too, and something Dow Loggins talked about is, how can you have the quarterback play you've had and then had the season that you have had? And part of that he mentioned in passing was and protect the football the way you have at the quarterback position. I would expand that out to protect the football the way you have across the board. This has not been a season where you look back and say, man, South Carolina would have won that game if they just hadn't turned the ball over. For the most part, they've been very, very good at protecting the football. And so, I think the other side of that is if you're South Carolina, you don't have that room for error to go turn the ball over and still expect to win. Like you can't have that going against you, I think. And frankly, I don't think you can kick a bunch of field goals in this game too. Like this is not the mismatch on paper that it was last year, at least as far as Vegas odds go. But I don't think this is a game you go into and say, hey, man, you can kick some field goals and win. You can turn the ball over a couple of times and win. You have to have all those game-changing type things go into your direction.
Well, and you look back at, another common thread, Tyler, is these teams forcing the 9 turnovers each on win streaks, also at home for both teams.
Yep.
Now, I will say, let's be fair here, Clemson has played, in my opinion, they've had some more impressive wins at home in that stretch as opposed to South Carolina, who's beaten Jacksonville State and Vandy and Kentucky. Kentucky, the best of those teams, but they've beaten some quality opponents, in that stretch. But also, they've not been great on the road just in general. So, how much have they really turned the corner? Look at the game even last week against North Carolina. Clemson got a very, very timely turnover on that play. UNC was about to go up 14-0 after a long touchdown run.
If a ball's ever going to bounce your way,
yeah,
that was one of the most insane things I've seen.
And a great play by Nate Wiggins to run him down, knock that ball out. That goes from 14-0 to now the points are off the board, and then Clemson sees momentum. They ended up going on a 14-play, 80-yard drive, and they scored a touchdown there to make it 7-7. So you had a 14-point swing. They end up winning that game by 11 points, right?
Yep.
So, again, the margin for error thing, I think it's there for both teams, right? Now, South Carolina may be – do they have a smaller margin? That could be the case. But, with some of the things we've seen from Clemson's offense, like you said, Wes, maybe more of a feature than a bug as far as turning the football over so much that, again, they are banged up. They're not as equipped to be able to have these swings and ebbs and flows. So which team can avoid those? Which team can kind of create the momentum on their end?
Absolutely. We'll get into our favorite segment of the week coming up. That is buy or sell as we get you set for South Carolina and Clemson. But first, as we head into this break, I have a pair of tickets for Tuesday's men's basketball games. They take on Notre Dame in the SEC versus ACC Challenge. Caller number 5 right now, 803-404-6100. Again, 803-404-6100. Win yourself a pair of tickets to see the Gamecocks take on the Fighting Irish come Tuesday night. Getting to buy or sell next is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
The football season is underway, and Believe podcasts are talking about it.
When he went home and went to sleep, Michael Parsons was terrorizing him.
Believe has podcasts covering all 32 professional teams and many of your favorite college teams, too.
And to be only producing 15 points a game, that's something that is definitely disheartening.
Sideline to sideline, end zone to end zone.
As a quarterback, I would expect him to be acting like that. Take the accountability. Put that on yourself. Don't put it on your teammates.
Search BLEAV podcasts wherever you listen.
Welcome back into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, West, and Chris along with you on this Football Friday, Black Friday edition. Got some great football coming up here in just a couple of minutes. But first, it's time for our favorite segment of the week. It's time, Dave, I hope this works, to buy or sell. to buy or sell? No? Okay, never mind. We're going to have to skip on NSYNC for this week. I apologize.
I can't go on.
Bye,
Can't
bye, 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 bye.
Oh,
I don't want to be a fool for you.
All right, I'll go
Just
on.
another-
I'll
okay,
go on.
all
I'll
right.
go on. Here we
There
go.
we go.
All right.
forced into action.
Buy or sell. Here we go. Guys, let's start with turnovers. We've been talking about turnovers all week, all day, certainly. Buy or sell. There will be 3 combined turnovers in this game. I already know what each of you is going to say. I can feel it.
I will buy that.
Tyler's going to buy.
I'll
Chris
buy.
is going to sell. He's going to say it's close. And I am going to sell
You nailed it, I think.
because I feel like both teams are going to be talking about turnovers so much this week.
It's too obvious,
It's-
almost.
Yeah. It's too easy.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, the streak of turnovers have to come to an end at some point. I do think Clemson's just been especially clumsy with football this year. Again, they lead the nation in fumbles lost, and those tend to come down in the red zone, which could be a huge swing for South Carolina, hopefully. I don't know. I'll sell. I'll buy. I'll buy just to be different.
Okay, there you go.
Chris, selling?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You nailed it. Like I said, you got all of them right. I'm
All right.
selling.
Let's get into something else we've talked about. Tackles for loss. Clemson top 10 in the country, 83 total tackles for loss this season. And, I struggle with where to put this number at. And I know, obviously, South Carolina, as far as tackles for loss allowed, has, frankly, not been good. I'll give you all that number here in a second. But let's set it at 9. Clemson will have 9 tackles for loss in this football game.
Chris, you can
What's
go first
the
on this
highest
one.
number South Carolina's surrendered this season? Do we know? I know you don't have that in front of you. Yeah, 9 sacks against UNC, so there's definitely.
Yeah, I might be able to get that for you real quick.
I was kind of, Shane Beamer made the comparison of Clemson's defense to A&M, right? So you're playing at home, but I feel like against A&M they gave up 10 tackles for loss. I'm pulling that out of my head, so I'm not sure.
Which was kind of right on the average that A&M
It was.
had coming into that game.
9 negative. I will.
South
buy.
Carolina's allowed 86 this year.
Clemson has 83.
Yeah, a 7.82 tackles for loss
Man,
game
That's a good buy or sell.
allowed.
And you said the number was 9?
9, yeah.
Okay.
I'm buying it, by the way.
Yeah,
You'll
I'm
buy
a
it?
buy.
Even South Carolina wins. I think
You think
Clemson's
okay.
going to have
Yeah.
some plays on the.
Yeah. I'm buying.
Yeah, I'm looking at their numbers this year. They've only gotten 9 or more tackles for losses 4 times. Miami, Georgia Tech, Charleston Southern, and Florida Atlantic. But they're always right around that number.
Yeah, see, it's going to be
yeah.
skewed very.
That's tough. I'll buy it too. Yeah.
You almost convinced me to go against it.
I know it's
But
that's a really
South
good.
Carolina has given up
They have, and that's not
a lot
completely
of negative
detrimental.
plays,
Doesn't mean they can't win, but yeah, Clemson's they're going to be in the backfield a lot.
for sure, or absolutely, as Tyler likes to say. That's his favorite word. I think absolutely. All right, Leggett. Our friends at KSR. Let me bring them up one more time. I think they're still crying.
It's been a KSR hate week, man.
Friends at KSR.
They're never going to come on. They're going to be like, I heard you guys were talking about me.
They would be doing the same.
Yes.
Friends at KSR, I think they had it at 74 as kind of their cutoff for Xavier Leggett. So when Leggett gets 74 yards receiving, the Gamecocks tend to win. When Leggett doesn't, the Gamecocks tend to lose. Now, if I set this thing at 74, everybody at this table is going to buy it. So we got to go higher. And we just had Leggett on Monday. So I feel like we've got some bias here as well. I'm setting it at 100. 100 yards receiving. Good round number. And I do wonder, is Clemson going to travel Wiggins to the side of the field that Leggett is on, how often will South Carolina line Leggett up in the slot?
Mm-hmm.
How often will they line him up in the backfield as a passing attack sort of approach? They've moved him around more and more and more, it seems like, as the year has progressed. So I'm not saying you hide him from Wiggins, but if you're looking for your matchups, you're going to see what you can do to kind of maybe get a better matchup there. I'm not saying Leggett's not – he's going to win a few share of those as well, but
Sure.
100 yards, buy or sell.
I will buy. Nate Wiggins, definitely the best defender on their team, expected to go maybe in the first round of the draft, but he's not this complete shutdown corner. Last week, he was paired up a lot against Tez Walker, who's the best receiver that North Carolina has. Tez still went for 70 yards in that game.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'd all easily say Xavier Leggett's a better receiver than Tez Walker. Now, South Carolina does not have that viable threat on the other side of the field, so more attention will be paid to Xavier Leggett than maybe what was paid to Walker last week. But, yeah, I mean, just the connection he and Spencer have, especially at home, has just been on fire this season. So I'll buy him over 100.
Yeah, I think it has to include one of those big Leggett down the field plays that we've seen so much this year. And, last week he kind of, it was a little bit more smaller chunk play here, smaller chunk play there. But this defensive structure, again, I've talked about it earlier this week, it's a little bit different. They're not a just keep everything in front defense like Kentucky is. So I'm going to say just because he's Leggett, and we've seen him do it all year long, that I think there will be some chances down the field. I think there will be a few times where Rattler just says, I'm going to let it eat, and I'm going to let 1-7 go make a play for me. I think Clemson will be in some one-on-one situations like that. So, yeah, I'm buying it too.
Xavier Leggett, Wes, to your question earlier about where will South Carolina move him, I definitely think that's going to be part of the structure here by Dowell Loggins. He's lined up in the slot about 30% of the time this year. If you go back and look at the numbers, only 15 times total in the backfield, but could we see a little bit more of that? I think it's possible. Here's another stat for you that is helping shape whether I buy or sell this one. Xavier Leggett has only failed to get to 100 yards receiving at home one time this season.
At home.
At home. 94 yards, it was last week against Kentucky. Now, he also had 2 touchdowns in that game, so still had a great game.
I kind of counted that one in my head as a 100-yard
Yeah,
game. Like,
I
know it wasn't
Not
by
technically.
It's
but
a 100-yard day.
6 catches for 94 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like, that's basically a 100-yard game.
So you talk to the teacher, say, round that grade up another 6 points. Why
It's
not?
still an A.
But every other game, I mean, he's had his other lowest mark was 110 against Florida. So, yeah, I'm going to say he gets there. I'm going to say he gets over 100 yards.
We're all buying.
I think we're all buying.
I'm buying on that one.
All right, well, the last one is South Carolina will win the game, so we'll save that for
We'll give our keys to the game and make
Final
that
segment.
final buy or sell. Coming up, it is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Football Friday, Black Friday edition here on the game.
How wrestling really works and how you get the ratings. Eric Bischoff and Conrad Thompson explain on 83 Weeks.
Too much time is spent discussing talent's age. The younger demo is just as excited about a Paul Heyman or a John Cena or an Undertaker or Becky Lynch, or I don't care what their birth certificate says, they're going to draw a younger demo because they're fun to watch and they're great entertainers.
83 Weeks on YouTube or wherever you listen.
Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, Wes, and Chris along with you for a few more minutes. We're jumping into the halftime show with myself and Terry Ford, and obviously a full slate of football on today and tomorrow as well as we wrap up the regular season of college football. A lot of things coming to an end. Mentioned the Big Ten West ending officially. Got Iowa and Nebraska coming up at noon. That point total, I think, has gone down to 27 now. So looking forward to a low-scoring defensive affair, unless Marcus Satterfield's offense just suddenly lights the world on
I
fire.
think it's even lower than that.
That'll
Yeah.
end offensive football.
It might.
Watch it be like 55.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
52 or
Just
something.
go out with a bang. Last Pac-12 after dark tomorrow, Cal and UCLA. It's going to be a sad time. Hopefully something weird happens there. Obviously, we're focused on South Carolina and Clemson, though. We have been talking about all the elements of this game. If you had to think of one specific key to this game, what's going to be tomorrow?
Well, I saw Chris working on his keys to victory over there a second ago, I think. So
I hid the screen from Wes so he couldn't see.
I'll let him go first.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to tell you something that is actually one, but I don't want to say it.
Okay.
So I'll focus on another one. I mean, turnovers are going to be big, but I feel like that's just one of those, like, overplayed.
Turnovers, run the football, stop the run. That's the key to every football game.
Score more points than the other team.
Key to every football game that's ever been played.
Let me give you one, though, and it. So I have three, and turnovers, that was one. The other one was another little bit, like, maybe overplayed, and it's what we talked about for a good portion of the show, and it was, negative plays. You got to avoid them. But here's the one I went with, more big picture. Make your difference at quarterback show, right? So Spencer Rattler needs to be Spencer Rattler in this game, and that's going to mean making some big plays when he's got time. It's going to mean escaping some potential negative plays. It's going to be getting the Gamecocks out of some bad situations, which we've seen from him all season. The flip side of that is, Cade Klubnik, and whether it's something generated by Clemson or by Cade, whether it's like the pressure, the environment, the crowd noise, or it's just South Carolina's defense playing well and making him make some tight window throws, push the ball downfield, maybe not connect, taking sacks, turning the football over. However that happens, I think the difference in quarterbacks with the Gamecocks having Spencer Rattler at home, having Cade Klubnik come on the road, that needs to show through in this game. I think.
Yeah, you got to make it matter. Make it matter that Rattler is the better quarterback, and I think some of that, and this may sound silly, but I'm gonna show my work too. If you got to just keep this game close enough, and I know another one that you always see as a key is like start fast, and my reasoning for that though is deeper. It is, for one, we've seen South Carolina actually be really, really good when they're on script on offense. And so I think for South Carolina, there are some matchups against this Clemson defense that you don't like. There are some things you do like, but there's some things you don't like. So I think you've got to take advantage of the fact that Dow Loggins typically has some really good, pretty creative game plans off the top. And the reason for that is it goes back into what Chris is saying. You got to make it matter. You got to put Klubnik in a spot where if he makes some bad decisions that it actually affects the game. If Clemson is running the football so well, or if South Carolina is not moving the football on offense, he can make mistakes, or possibly even worse, they won't even have to put him in spots to make mistakes. They will just say, we're going to not let our quarterback beat us, basically. And they'll just hand the football off all day long, which is really, frankly, what they should have done more last year.
Yep.
So, I think for South Carolina, you got to keep this thing within striking distance so that the pressure mounts on Clemson's offense. And I'm not necessarily even talking about defensive pressure like hitting the quarterback. I'm just talking about pressure to perform.
Right.
And the other part of that is that keeps your crowd in the game. And I have this thing I've noticed where if you go into a game and all you hear people talking about is, oh, the crowd is going to will this team to winning. If all you got to fall back on is the crowd, you're losing the game. Like that group over there that's a few miles from us right now at Williams-Brice, they're going to help you.
Sure.
But you got to help them too. You got to go win some plays on the field.
Yeah, and I do think the crowd is going to play a hand in this. And you mentioned the fact that Clemson's only played 4 road games this year. They've gone 1-3 in those road games, the only win being on the road at Syracuse back in September. The two most raucous environments of those road trips, Duke and NC State. And Cade Klubnik struggled in both those environments. He's not seen anything like Williams-Brice Stadium, at least up to this point in his college career. And again, that's not going to be the specific reason why South Carolina could win this game, but could certainly force him into situations where he isn't making the best decisions, going to business for himself, whatever you want to phrase it, that could end up being a pivotal player too. Got about a minute and a half here. Final scores for tomorrow.
I picked South Carolina 24-23.
Another one-pointer.
Hey, it worked last year.
It did. That's true.
I was so close.
Oh,
What was your score
to
last
having
year?
it. Final score was 31-30.
That's
Yes.
right.
South Carolina. I predicted. Y'all know I throw weird scores in there.
Yeah.
I had it 30-29.
Ooh, man.
You really picked a 1-pointer last year.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
I did. 24-23.
So to make sure we hit buy or sell, buying a Gamecocks win.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm doing the same because this is at home, close game. I've got the Gamecocks by 3 again, 27-24.
Okay.
Chris is going back to that well because he hit it last week too.
That's right. There's no
Well,
doubt.
we're all kind of in the same neighborhood. I also think South Carolina can win.
Can win.
I'm going one. It's funny. Somebody texted earlier, said the way you've talked about Clemson, it sounds like you're picking them. I'm not. I'm just kind of telling you how tough it's going to be tomorrow. It's not going to be easy by any means, but there is a path for South Carolina to win, and I think they can. I'm also going to go with the 1-point win, 28-27.
Oh, man.
So we're all right in that same ballpark once again.
Tyler, you have completely graduated your course on hating Clemson. The final step, Chris and I were talking about this earlier this week. Don't tick off the South Carolina fans by picking against them, against Clemson, unless it's just like an obvious one.
Yeah, well,
If
you
it's
know,
close, you go with
If it's close, be a homer.
growing up in the Georgia Tech rivalry, I've always said I don't care if Georgia Tech's playing the local Pop Warner team. I'm picking the Pop Warner team. So I use the same thought process here.
You would be right a couple of years, I feel
Yeah,
like.
probably so. That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Football Friday rolls along with myself and Terry Ford with the halftime show coming up next, right here on the game.
The football season is underway, and Believe podcasts are talking about it.
When he went home and went to sleep, Michael Parsons was terrorizing him.
Believe has podcasts covering all 32 professional teams and many of your favorite college teams, too.
And to be only producing 15 points a game, that's something that is definitely disheartening.
Sideline to sideline, end zone to end zone.
As a quarterback, I would expect him to be acting like that. Take the accountability. Put that on yourself. Don't put it on your teammates.
Search BLEAV podcasts wherever you listen.